Hello everyone and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you then I'd appreciate it if you left this video a like and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I'm going to be reviewing the newest A24 horror film, Talk to Me, directed by Dhanji and Michael Philippou. Now, if you know anything about A24, you know that they are known for their horror movies. Now, of course, they do have movies outside of that subject matter, but generally that is what they are known for, and they are also known for typically being pretty weird and off the wall. Also, big respect to A24 for being a company that is actually complying with SAG-AFTRA's demands and seems like a decent company to work with. I really appreciate them for that. I was very interested in Talk to Me. I always check out A24's movies, especially after the very solid streak they went on last year. Now, I'll be honest, I wasn't very familiar with the directors Dhanji or Michael before this movie, but in looking them up and hearing reviews about them, apparently they are known for this YouTube channel known as Raka Raka, which has a pretty solid amount of subscribers, almost 7 million, and they're sort of known for doing these big videos with lots of big stunts in them from what I have seen. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on that, because I'll be honest, I am not entirely well versed in their YouTube videos, but they are people that I'm definitely going to be checking out more. But this is their big movie directing debut. It is an indie film, so they were able to have a lot of creative freedom on it. And basically, the movie is about a group of friends who discover that they can sort of get in contact with the spirit world using this embalmed hand. And they sort of treat it like a social media sort of prank to do. But when we meet our main character, Mia, who is sort of dealing with some grief with the loss of her mom, and she interacts with the hand, she discovers that what the hand does in its interaction with the spirit world is actually real, that these spirits actually do exist and they actually do talk to you. And when you say, "I let you in," you can let the spirit into your body for a brief time and they sort of possess your body and become you. But on the night when Mia is interacting with the spirit, eventually, after she is done, one of her friends, Riley, who she sort of has a sibling-like relationship with, he interacts with the hand and he sort of becomes possessed by Mia's deceased mom. And disaster strikes when this happens, as Mia's trying to figure out what exactly happened in her mom's death and whether her father is being entirely truthful about the matter of her passing. Now, if you know anything about A24 and their movies, then you also know that they are very polarizing. People tend to have very strong opinions on them, and it tends to be one of two reactions. Either they love the movie or they hate it. Now, with this one, it has been almost universally positive, which is not typical for an A24 movie at all. Usually, A24 flicks are critical darlings, but are not very well liked by the general public. I would argue that this one fits more under a more straightforward type of A24 movie as well. You aren't going to get something like It Comes at Night or Hereditary or even Midsummer where there's more bizarre things happening. Now, I will say that this movie does have some bizarre moments in it, but overall, plot-wise, it is pretty straightforward and easy to figure out. But how does this movie fare overall? Well, let's talk about it. Now, I will say in the lead up to this movie, critics and audiences alike, before I saw it, were calling this one of the scariest movie experiences they've had in recent memory. Some are calling it the most terrifying movie of the year. And, well, what do I think about that? Well, I personally disagree. In fact, I have some opinions about Talk to Me that are probably going to be a little contentious considering how many people really do enjoy this movie and how widely acclaimed it's getting. I personally do not feel the same way about this one, which is sort of disappointing because I am one that tends to think that A24 has been on a really good streak of movies lately. I will say that this one was a bit of a step down in my opinion. Now, I'm not going to say this movie is bad, and I think there are some really good moments in it, so let's start with talking about those. The first thing I really enjoyed about this movie is the directors treating the interaction with the hand and how the teenagers interact with it as a sort of social media, TikTok-like game. This was a very fitting way to interpret how teenagers would interact with a horror like this, and I think entirely believable, and maybe the best part about the movie. Because in real life, we do see a lot of horror content on TikTok done like this. I also do think that there are some pretty effective moments in here. I do appreciate this movie for actually holding true to its R rating. In fact, I would say this horror movie is one of the hardest R ratings for a horror film that I have seen in quite some time. There's a lot of R-rated horror movies lately that I feel like didn't really go as far as they could have, considering they had that rating, but this one definitely does. There are some pretty brutal moments in here, especially in the first moments when Riley is interacting with the hand, that go pretty far and feel almost inspired by The Exorcist in some ways. In fact, I was getting Exorcist vibes throughout this whole movie, which that works to this movie's detriment as well, which I'll talk about later. But I did like that this movie went for some bigger moments and that they did pay off. I also do think, acting-wise, that this movie was pretty solid across the board. Sophie Wilde as main character Mia, I do have some mixed thoughts about her that I'll talk about later, but generally I did think she was solid enough as Mia, especially as I thought about it more. She has definitely some hard material to deal with and going through the emotional turmoil of losing her mom in this movie, and she has to portray that, and I think she generally does so believably. When she's dealing with that grief, you really do feel that she has those emotions. Miranda Otto is, in my opinion, the biggest highlight of this movie as Sue. She is sort of a family friend of Mia, and Mia views her more as a parent than her own dad, because her dad has been closed off ever since her mom's passing. And I really like how they portray Sue as a very realistic parent. She is someone who is actually strict to her kids and holds them to high standards and doesn't want them doing certain things. She's actually a smart parent in saying that she doesn't want them to interact with this hand. Unlike some horror parents who just play very dumb, I like that they make her a much more smart and grounded parent, and that her relationship with her children feels real to me. Alexandra Jensen is good as Jade. I found her to actually be a bit of a more sympathetic character than Mia. And Joe Bird as Riley is pretty good in this as well, even though he's not actually playing in the movie that much because of events that happened to him, which I will not spoil. But overall, I did think the performances in this movie were pretty good. I thought all the younger performances were pretty believable, and it was nice to see a movie populated by younger, unknown actors who clearly have plenty of potential. On to addressing the scares of this movie. Now, I am going to have to disagree when people say that this is one of the most terrifying movies they've seen. It's weird that this movie has billed itself as such and has really hinged on that fact that it is super scary. And I'll admit the trailers cut it to be more scary than it actually is. Now, this is a problem with a lot of A24 movies, in my opinion, where they market themselves one way, but they are not that way in reality. It is much more atmospheric than you might expect. There are definitely some big, sort of scary moments that it tries to do, but, and this is where we get to the negatives, I don't think it really pulls those moments off. Now, I did say that I thought this movie had some big violent horror moments that fit the R rating, and I appreciated the movie going for those big swings, and I do stand by that. But unfortunately, those moments are interrupted by moments where I feel it becomes very cliched horror and feels super inspired by other movies to the point that it can be a little irritatingly obvious at this point. This movie is sort of a sum of other better horror movies, in my opinion, at many points, sadly. The Exorcist is this movie's most obvious inspiration, in my opinion, but you could also even say that it is inspired by Insidious. The way that the characters interact with the spirit world feels very much so how characters interact with The Further and Insidious, except a lot less creative. There are also just plenty of cliched scare moments in here, like when Mia is looking in a window/mirror and she sees a figure, but then she turns around, the figure's not there. Lights flickering, just a lot of horror tropes. There's even a trope of a character just being off in a corner and then sort of crawling to the character in a sort of cliched fashion. And what's worse about some of the scares is that I can't tell whether we're supposed to be laughing at them or supposed to be scared by them. I think there are definitely parts of this movie where it's not wanting to take itself seriously, but then there are moments where I think it is, just because of a musical score, but the scares come across as rather weak. This is also where we come to some of my mixed feelings on Sophie Wilde's acting. When she is scared, I feel like she's overacting a little bit. I'm not going to say that she's entirely overacting, but it does feel like she's maybe selling it, trying to sell it a little too much, and it doesn't work as well as it could. But that is not the worst part of these scares. It's just that the scares feel like a little bit of a mixed bag, and there weren't that many moments in this movie where I actually felt scared. I think maybe the biggest weakness of this movie is that it is a trauma horror movie, and we have seen a lot of those lately. Movies that are more about a character's grief or what trauma they are going through than the scares themselves. This what happened in a movie already earlier this year, The Boogeyman. It happened in Smile last year, and of course, whenever trauma horror movies come out, I always think back to I'd just rather watch The Babadook if I'm going to watch a trauma horror movie. They just seem to have the same themes all the time. And while maybe this one has some more interesting ruminations on how grief affects people, especially the darker side of how grief can affect people, it still ultimately adds up to the same theme in my opinion and doesn't work as well. I will say the thing that brings this movie a little bit of a step up for me from just being average is the ending. It has a pretty effective ending that I think is pretty dark and feels sort of eerie in retrospect when you hear what Mia talks about in a dream earlier in the movie, or rather when she's discussing with Riley a dream that she commonly has. And when you think about that and how the movie ends, it works pretty well, and I think it creates an effective bookend that did leave a bit of an impact on the movie that made it shine a little better than I think it probably could have. But overall, I did feel I wanted to like this movie more than I did. I constantly had a hard time trying to decide whether I liked or disliked the main character, and whether the movie wanted me to like or dislike her. I think it wanted me to at least be sympathetic for her, but it was really hard to be sympathetic to her because of some of the choices that she was making. Now, I understand some of the choices that she was making were influenced by her grief, and that part of the movie's thematic arc was that grief makes us irrational people, but it gets to the point of sometimes unbelievability, in my opinion. But maybe other people will view that differently. That's just was my general impression of the movie. Still, I am going to give this a solid 3 out of 5 stars. I would recommend it to a general degree. I think most people are probably going to enjoy this better than I did. And I do wish I enjoyed this one better than I personally did, but it just didn't pan out for me as much as I would have liked it to. So yeah, those were my thoughts on Talk to Me. What were your thoughts on this movie? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please be sure to leave this video a like, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.